So have you noticed these little glowing sparkles next to skill names? Those are actually the game giving you a hint that you might want to consider using that skill based on the current battlefield conditions. Also, when you attack Nevrons on the map, lots of times you'll get a new weapon as a reward, or if it's a weapon you already have, you'll often get a higher level version of it. So fighting Nevrons on the map is a good way to save resources and upgrade some weapons for free. I've got a bunch more little tips like that for you, but first, let me show you how to get really good at what's probably the single most important mechanic in the entire game: parrying. I gotta admit, I was frustrated with parrying for a while, but then I figured out the trick to getting the timing right. Actually, I've got a few tricks for you, but the one that was the biggest game changer for me was learning to watch the edges of the screen. See, most enemy attack animations have a period towards the end where they go sort of slow-mo for a moment right before speeding up again to hit you. During that slow-mo, your entire view on screen zooms out and then quickly zooms back in when they speed up again. And that's the moment you want to use as your cue to hit parry, as soon as the camera gets to its max zoom out. So instead of getting hyper focused on the enemy and only watching them, you actually want to keep an eye on the edges of the screen because that's where the zoom effect is most noticeable. Now, I don't mean you should literally stare directly at one edge of your screen. That's not what I'm doing. I mean, feel free to give that a try, maybe it'll work well for you, but what I'm actually doing is just sort of watching the edges of the screen in my peripheral vision. I'm keeping an eye out for that maximum zoom out so I can hit parry as soon as I see it. But if watching the camera zoom doesn't click for you, here's a few other tricks. You can also just watch the enemy directly. In that case, you want to keep an eye out for the moment they start to come out of that slow-mo period. Actually, that's what I was doing for a while at first, and it worked okay, but a lot of enemy attacks, especially later on, start to get more complex, and it's really easy to get tricked by an earlier part of the attack animation and end up hitting parry too soon. So I stopped relying on that method, but it might work for you. But the other major thing to look out for, or rather listen for, are the distinct audio cues many attack animations have. You can't rely on this for all attacks because some just don't have a clear audio cue, but there are many that do, and they're very helpful when you can hear them. And to make it easier to hear them, it can help to turn down the music volume. Don't get me wrong, I love the music in this game, but the battle music can get pretty loud, which makes it hard to hear the attack audio cues. The other thing to do, which will actually probably help you even more, is use a set of headphones instead of relying on your TV or monitor speakers. Even a set of really nice speakers won't let you distinguish different sounds as easily as just a basic set of headphones. But even if you don't want to use headphones, I've got some more tricks to help you parry. And don't worry, we'll get to lots more than just parrying in a minute. But similar to watching the edges of the screen in your peripheral vision, I find it can actually help to not look directly at enemies. Instead, you can look at one of the characters in your party, at the ground near their feet, or even at the middle of the battlefield. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is to watch the enemy in your peripheral vision. It sounds weird, but there's actually a scientific reason why this works. Your eyes are better at detecting detail and color when you look at things directly, but the cells in your eyes that are used for peripheral vision are better at detecting motion. So not looking directly at the enemy can actually make it easier to track their movement and time your parries. Some enemies, like these lusters, also have clear visual cues to help with timing, which makes it way easier. For these guys, it's as soon as you see their arms glow. Clear visual indicators like this are pretty rare though, so you can't rely on them very often. But really, the first thing you should do to learn to parry is not parry. The game will tell you this in loading screen hints, but dodging actually has a more forgiving window than parrying. So every time you come across a new enemy, it's smart to stick to just dodging all their attacks at first so you can learn their attack patterns and timing. Just dodge until you can do that comfortably, and keep an eye out for how many perfect dodges you're getting. If you're getting a lot of perfect dodges, that means your timing is getting tighter and you're probably ready to start parrying. The difficulty levels do affect the length of the parry window too, so lowering the difficulty is a good way to ease yourself into parrying if you're finding it frustrating. But there are two big benefits of parrying that really make it worth getting the hang of. First, each successful parry gives your character an action point, which are the fuel for basically all your strongest attacks, so gaining a bunch by nailing parries really tilts the scales in your favor. The other big benefit is getting counterattacks. Not only are these super satisfying, but they can also deal big damage on top of the attacks you do on your turn. But most people don't realize that you don't actually have to parry every hit in an attack combo to get the counter. Sometimes that is what you have to do, but only if the enemy attacks a single character. See, the criteria for getting a counter is actually that the last character attacked needs to parry all attacks they receive. So for example, when this trebuchet throws its lightning thingies at multiple members of my party, I can actually miss every parry with the first two characters, but I'll still get the counter because I nailed the parry for the single attack that went to the last character. Now, if 2 or more attacks had gone to the last character, then I would have needed to parry them all, but all the misses with the other characters before that still wouldn't matter. So the takeaway is don't give up on parrying even if you're missing a bunch. It can still be rewarding even if you manage to just get back in the groove for the last few hits. But let's back up for a second and make sure we're on the same page with some basics. Anytime you're about to get into a fight, you want to make sure you initiate the fight by hitting R1 to blast the enemy with some magic. That gives you first strike, which makes sure you get to take the first turn. And one of the very first things you want to do in battle is check to see if enemies have any glowing weak points. Some are more obvious, like the glowing head on this Lancelier, while others are a bit more hidden, like the one on this Sakapatate's shoulder. And actually, that's a good example of one that takes more than one hit to break. Some weak points do take multiple hits to break, but give good damage and can disable attacks when you finally do break them. You want to hit weak points with free aim shots, both to deal a solid chunk of damage and because it can build up a lot of break damage. We went into the details of break in my last video, but basically this gold bar under the enemy's health bar is the break bar. It's similar to a stun bar in many other games. You need to build it up all the way, but then when you see this little gold star at the end of the break bar, you need to use a skill that says can break to actually trigger the break. That's the part that's different from most games. Triggering a break removes defenses an enemy might have that could be nerfing your damage. It also boosts the damage you deal to them for the rest of the turn. And most enemies, but not all, will also enter a stun state when you break them, which makes them miss their next turn, leaving you free to beat down on them even more. So if you find a Pictos that mentions the stun state, that's what it's referring to. But each time it's one of your character's turn, you have a handful of different actions you can take. We already talked a bit about free aim shots, but there are 2 additional things to keep in mind with them. First, each shot costs 1 action point to use. They're not completely free. And second, free aim shots are generally your most cost-effective way to remove enemy shields. Of course, on your turn, you can also do a basic attack by just hitting X. And you can boost their utility later on with specific Pictos and Lumina to make them more useful. We'll talk more about Pictos and Lumina in just a minute. You also have the option to skip a character's turn or flee. You won't use either of those very often, but skipping can come into play with more advanced strategies, and fleeing can come in handy if an enemy snuck up on you before you were ready. But assuming you do want to fight, your other options are using an item or a skill attack. Those items are actually called Tints, and they let you heal, revive, or give action points to one of your characters. Something you definitely want to be on the lookout for are 2 special resources you can use to upgrade the Tints. The first type are shapes, which make the Tints much more effective. For example, boosting healing from the base level of just 30% to 65%. There are 2 shapes in the game for each tint, and when you find one, you need to use it at the camp to actually apply the upgrade. Don't worry if you don't have the camp yet, it comes in Act 2. The second type of upgrade material are shards, and these increase the number of times you can use the tint before you run out and need to rest at a flag to recharge them. There are between 7 and 10 shards for each tint, so explore thoroughly and keep an eye out for shapes and shards, but also don't worry too much if you don't find them all. Even just finding a few for each tint will give you a big leg up. But of course, the most interesting part of combat are skills, which are your special attacks. These get unlocked with points in each character's skill tree, which they gain as they level up. Skills are the most significant ingredient that goes into crafting builds, and they each cost a different number of action points to use, which you see in blue right here. Skill attacks also always have at least 1 QTE, or QuickTime event, where you can boost their damage and effects by hitting X with the right timing. To do these properly and get perfects, you don't want to hit the button immediately. Instead, wait for a moment for the timer around the edge to get into the gold zone and then hit the button. But finding synergies between different characters' skills and building strategies around those interactions is really where the combat system shines. For example, early on, a simple but powerful rotation is to start with Gustav's powerful skill to give the whole party a damage boost. Then get enemies burning with one of Lune's fire skills like Wildfire. Burning does some damage over time, which is good, but more importantly, it sets up Mael to enter her powerful Virtuose stance by using Swift Stride, which triggers Virtuose stance when she attacks an enemy that's burning. Virtuose stance triples Mael's damage output, which combined with the boost from Gustav and Mael's strongest skills like Parry, allows you to deal lots of damage. But to pull off a rotation like that in just one turn, you need to know how to make the characters go in the exact order you want. I think many people pick up on the fact that the character's speed stats matter for this, which is true, but sometimes they don't seem to go in the right order. That's because there's a couple other things that matter too. So with nothing else at play, the character with the highest speed stat will go first, second highest speed will go second, and so on. So if you've got a specific order you want your characters to go in, then you do want to manage that by putting attribute points into agility for each character accordingly. But if they still don't go in the order you intended, it's because you got first strike. When you do a first strike, for whatever reason, the game sets the order for the first round of turns based on the order you added characters to the party. Like literally the order you added them to the party in the menu. Don't ask me why, but it only affects your first round of turns. After that, it'll go in order of character speed stats. So if you want to make sure to always maintain a certain order, first make sure the speed stat for each character is in descending order. Then go into the menu and remove everyone from the party except the person that you want to go first. And then add the other characters back in the order you want them to go. That way, even when you do a first strike, you'll get the order you want on the first round. Now, the first strike Pictos can also add some confusion here because it'll stack its own ordering on top of the speed stat ordering as well. So that could be causing some confusion too, especially if you only have it applied to a single character. But regardless of turn ordering, you don't want to ignore getting the speed stat up for all your characters. Early on, the speed stat doesn't matter too much, but as you start to face tougher and tougher enemies, if you ignore giving agility points, you're going to find that the enemies will get multiple turns in a row before you get to go, which obviously makes things really difficult. So even though you want to be mindful of each character's speed stat for maintaining your desired turn order, you also want to keep giving all your characters some agility points on a regular basis so they can keep up with the enemies as you get further along. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if you don't know what to put your attribute points into, just dump them into agility. In the long run, it's arguably the most important attribute to put points in, up to about 50 points or so. After that, you start seeing diminishing returns. If you ever need to redistribute attribute points, you can use Recoat to do that whenever you want. Recoat is somewhat rare early on, but it becomes easier to get in the endgame. But when you distribute points, you might have also noticed that putting points into one attribute will sometimes actually boost multiple other stats. The exact links between stats are unique for each character, and there are specific rules for how this works, but in practice, you're typically just going to choose the stat you want to put attribute points towards and consider the additional stat boosts a nice bonus, and that's totally fine. If you do want to get a little more sophisticated with it, before you distribute attribute points, you can go through each attribute and just see what would happen if you were to dump all the points into a single one. That'll show you which other stats will get boosted and give you a sense for how much they get affected compared to the primary stat. Then you can optimize a bit better as you distribute points. In general, I also recommend not dumping too many points into Vitality. It might seem like a good idea because more health is always a good thing, but just be aware you don't get that much health for each point. You'll find Pictos later on that boost health by literally over 1,000, so in the long run, you really won't need many attribute points in Vitality. On the other hand, you don't want to ignore luck. Getting your critical rate up, especially for characters that already have a high base critical rate, is really helpful for damage output, since those critical critical hits boost damage by 50%. Again, you'll find Pictos later on that can boost critical rate a lot, so you don't need to dump a ton of points into luck, but enough to get critical rate up to at least 15% and maybe as high as 30% without Pictos is a good idea. Along with agility and luck, I would consider might my third highest priority, simply to boost damage output. I generally don't put many points into defense because even though it does help mitigate damage, it doesn't mitigate it that much. So you'd have to put a lot of points into defense for it to make a significant difference. Agility, luck, and might are definitely my highest priorities. But if you've got a favorite weapon for a certain character, you'll want to take that into consideration too. Each weapon scales its damage with a few different attributes, which you can see by checking for the little weapon icon that's shown on each attribute. So if a weapon you like scales well with defense, for example, then putting more points into defense can make sense. Oh, and by the way, if you're looking to level up characters quickly early on so you have more attribute points to work with, go over here to the hidden gestural arena and just fight the final boss over and over again. He's fairly easy and gives pretty good XP. But the way to really boost your character's power is by using the best Pictos in Lumina. I'm working on that video right now and I'll put it right here when it's ready. If you want to know how Pictos and Lumina work, you can check out my essential tips video linked in the pinned comment. Either way, thanks for watching and I'll see you in just a second.